Can you see my screen now? Okay, I'll wait for everybody to once they join. India, తీసుకెళ్ళిన తర్వాత తింటా. Are we good to start, Puna? Okay, let me know. Okay. Okay, thank you, Punam. So, hello everyone. Um, my name is Srinivas Mari. I'll be working at Fanime as an information system security architect, and I'll also playing the role of the cloud security architect as well. So, I was been dealing with several architectures from business units. I primarily deal with the single family and digital engineering portfolios at their side. So today it brought me to give a guest lecture on how the cybersecurity or information system security is being taken care at in the real-time environments in companies like federal agencies or technology companies, things like that. So before diving into all of these things, I would like to know each one of you introduce yourself and your expectations on this particular session. So that way I know how much deep I should go in. Maybe you can start now. Okay, that sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. Good to hear. Thank you. Got you. Thank you. Definitely. You'll be getting wealth of information in this. Thank you. That's nice. Thank you. Definitely. Thank you. Definitely. Thank you. Do you have anyone else? All right. So I think I got what uh, you are looking for. So feel free to stop me at any point of time you want to know something else, something more, because the purpose of this particular session is to make you understand about cybersecurity and how it works. More of it, rather than getting into the theory of it, I would like to showcase you how this is going to be done in real time in companies. No matter it could be a technology company or it could be a federal agencies, companies, or of that sort. So feel free to stop me at any point of time you start with, or you want to know more information on that, and make it as an interactive session. So having said that, I know like there are certain juniors of the high school. I'll start with the basics of each one of it, and I'll dive into the scope of things that I bought in here. And it's a kind of a challenge for me to get into your expectations, like how much depth I need to go and how much of fundamentals I should cover. So feel free to ask me questions. That's the way you can learn something out of it. All right. So the agenda of this session, I randomly pick my choices. I take a liberty to bring out all of these topics. Let's to give an idea about first of all what is security in the context of information technology, and in the context of any other industry, predominantly in the software industry, to say and how an information security teams and what kind of roles are there in a company. Specific, it could be a government or it could be a federal government agencies or it could be a technology company. Maybe with the minimal changes, pretty much that is going to be the same across all the companies and how the cloud security evolution has been taken place, starting from before cloud, what is the security, and after cloud, what is the security evolution happens. And any company, if you talk, they have certain policies, guidelines, standards, and procedures has been defined. So a person getting into the company, its first and foremost thing they need to do is understand the company's culture that is being laid out and are enforced through their policies, standards, guidelines, and all that. So that's what we are going to talk about here. And for a security, we have three pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And how these things can be achieved when it comes to authentication and authorization. And for any company, data is the biggest asset. So the primary aim of a security is to protect that data. So data has a classification and different levels of classification, and there is a different states of the data and different roles people will play for that particular data. And that's where you have a lot of domains today as a data science and analytics, all that thing came up. So we'll talk more there. So, and next thing is the security engineering. And when it comes to engineering, what are all the things we do in terms of protecting your data and infrastructure and other services, how it's been engineered. So we'll dive into that in that section. And vulnerability management. Vulnerability means a weakness. So when we write the code, when the people teams write the softwares, develop the softwares, and what kind of vulnerabilities it can come, and what is attacks, how a hacker will exploit a weakness of a vulnerability in their code or in the library that they use. So all that is part of vulnerability management. So just to give you a glimpse of the recent security attacks, it could be any recent to last few years. So I just give you a glimpse of how a security attack, how much of a damage it could happen. So if we are ignoring certain small things while writing a code, if that code is not in a defensive mode, what kind of hacks it will happen, how much of damage it can do. That we would see that in the recent security attack section. So I just want to get you into a feel of how artificial intelligence and machine learning plays a role in cybersecurity and how anomalies can be detected, those topics there. And finally, I just want to touch upon how the development operations can be secured. So that's the agenda. It sounds like more, but feel free to stop me whenever you have any doubt or any clarification you want to do. I'm here to help you out in getting that understanding clear. All right, moving on to next slide. So, what is security? So, security is nothing but we were trying to protect certain areas. It could be the confidentiality of your information or your data or accessibility, what information needs to be accessed by whom, and what functionalities can be done by whom. All that. It also not only the accessibility of it, and also where the non-repudiation. It means every time the user has to expect the same result as a proof. If I get an access to a particular information, I expect the same information to be retrieved at any point of time. I should not be stopped in accessing that. So things like that, we got to protect our services in terms of data, or in terms of network, or in terms of confidentiality of our information. All of these things collectively need to be protected. We call them as security. We got to secure our systems. We got to secure our identities. Identities means it could be a user identity, or it could be a non-user identity at a service level. So we got to protect all of that so that it will not be misused. So now in the security field, we have so many subdomains are there. Or to start with, the primary domain would be information security. So, and we have cyber security and network security, endpoint security. You have a lot, infrastructure security and things like that. To just to capture few, I just listed it here as a four. So information security is primarily protecting your data, not to disrupt by anyone else in terms of denial of services or distributed denial of services like DDoS attacks, things like that. What they do is they flood a request and they keep on hit the request to your server and bring out your server down. That is called denial of service. So it's been several attacks of that nature. So we got to protect our systems, not to go down. Or a hacker should not come inside and modify your systems in terms of its configurations, or in terms of its data modifications, things like that. So we got to protect your systems and protect your data. It's a combination of protection of your information as well as not to get threats attacked to your systems. So information security, when we say, it deals with cybersecurity as well. So whereas cybersecurity is specifically specialized for the threat management. So protecting your systems not to get the threats, if at all, when the threat are being arise, how to do an incident response, and how to bring back the systems to normal stage within the agreed SLA, service level agreements. So all that is being dealt by cybersecurity. So information security, if you say the cybersecurity, network security, and endpoint security, all these are all part of information security. So the cybersecurity is specialized from threat management side of it. So, and next is the network security. When we say network security, between the systems, between the networks, between the data centers. When I say data center, consider data center is a company before it's cloud. It is having its own infrastructure in their own campus is of the servers and all the systems in their own campus considered as a data center. So the communications will go from there to another network, and how to secure those networks, what IP, the intellectual properties, or the internet addresses, and how what kind of addresses is to be allowed and what should not be allowed. It could be within your network, or it could be geographical networks. When I say geographical networks, it is between countries, or it would be between regions or availability zones. So the controlling of this network access is all been secure through in the network security. We use tools to control that. It could be firewalls, so that there's a packet inspection and what communication should be allowed and what not allowed. And it could be demilitarized zones, they call DMZ. So demilitarized zones will be a beginning of the network in our system. So once that does its inspection of the calls and the data, and then it sends back to our firewalls, internal firewalls. And these firewalls or DMZs, they also do the virus scans, packet inspections, and they do the certificate verifications, all that stuff. When I say certificate, it's a digital certificates. We'll talk more about that in the slides. And when it comes to endpoint security, an endpoint could be at the end user side, it could be a client side browser, or it could be a server side service. When you say endpoint, it could be a microservice fronted by an API, and it could be any of that sort. How to protect that from unauthorized access. So that's all talk about endpoint security. These are all different sets of specializations. You need to get a grasp of it. See, while learning any domain, it could be cybersecurity or it could be a development, any of these things. Today, the industry expects a T-shaped professionals. When I say T-shaped professionals, you need to have a breadth of knowledge on all these topics and a depth of expertise in few of things. So somebody may be very good in cryptography, so he need to have he can get into a depth of knowledge about it. Somebody can be having more interest on Python. He can get a depth of knowledge, but as a breadth of topics, you should be aware of what is all this stuff. So that way, when the need arises, when you get into a job or doing any project, you can dwell into gain more information out of it. So one has to be a T-shaped professional in their careers. All right. Moving on to next slide. So in an information security world where you can get all of these domains, it could be a cyber security, it could be a network security, or it could be an endpoint security. You are going to see so many different teams. I just covered certain commonly used teams, commonly arranged teams. So these teams are maybe more or less will be there in a company. But at least to get you an idea, these teams will be there most of the time. So in federal, definitely yes, in federal companies. So to start with, any company, they have three sets of areas in a common. It could be operations, engineering, and architecture. So in the security side. So what operations they do, what engineering they do, what architecture they do. So it's all categorized based upon their policies and guidelines. So when I say operations, it could be, for say, for example, a certificate has an expiration, maybe 2 years. After when it comes to 2 years, at least 45 days before, there will be an alert to a customer, hey, your certificate is getting expired, make it renewed, so that they can make their transit communications in a secure way. So the certificates is meant for that. So they call a security operations team and say that, hey, I want this. If you don't know the process, especially when dealing with customers, when you provide certificates to them. So they say like, hey, this is the digital certificates team. You need to talk to them and get your certificate renewed. So things like that, the security operations, there will be a whole lot of operations out there. And they also have SOAR. SOAR is a short form for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. So they basically, operations team does three areas of works they do. One is they do the security orchestration of integrating the things to achieve a certain common goal, like automation and when an incident arises, what response they need to do. And there is something called forensics. So they isolate the systems and they do analysis, what went wrong and all that is called a forensic analysis to get by getting certain log information and all things like that. So there are a bunch of operations they do. So one such example I given is orchestration, automation, and response, and engineering. So the engineering team basically they provide they maintain a record of certificates what they are issuing to different teams, and they also does certain cryptographic operations like what algorithms they need to use and how many bits of keys they need to use. All that engineering aspects they do, and they do certain automation as well, like how the SOAR in security operations team does. Security engineering team also does the same, but in a different way of making it available to the operations. So it's a kind of back-end service to the operations team, security engineering, and they also deal with application teams. So when a team looking for a specific certs, then they reach out to security engineering team to get all of that functional, and they do certain automations that are required from security side. And architecture team in security, They closely work with engineering as well as the business units from application side. So whenever they do a particular application development design, usually their technical leads or architects, application architects or solution architects, they provide a solution to solve a particular business problem or a business functionality to address. And it's a security architect responsibility to add a security lens on top of that. What communications needs to be secured, and what data needs to be protected, and the accessibility in a least privileged mode. There should not A person should not have more permissions than what he really requires. If at all he has more permissions than what he doesn't require, then it is called privilege creep. So it's all security architect responsibility to make sure the accessibility is in a right way granted, and the policies got enforced at all stages of infrastructure, and the software development is being following the secure coding guidelines. All these things is being taken guided by a security architect from the solution perspective. So nowadays in the companies, there are a lot of SaaS providers came in. So people are not developing everything from the scratch within in-house. They are going out and buying a product for their requirement. It could be a monitoring, or it could be a performance monitoring, or it could be database monitoring from monitoring point of view, or it could be a functionalities. So if you say, for example, your application team requires a WebSockets communication, there is a product called Lightstreamer. So it's a SaaS product. They go and buy that one. And to secure your secrets, you need a vault. So it could be Amazon Secrets Manager or CyberArk. There are so many outside products are available. And if you want to do any encryption or a tokenization, you have a SaaS vendors like very good security from Google and Google Data Locker. There are so many of those services out there. Things like that, you need to integrate those systems within your systems, and you got to make sure how the commute between these two platforms needs to be enabled so that others will not come in. So things like that, you got to make sure the security is rightly in place so that the hackers will not do the man in middle attacks or things like that. So it's all security architect's responsibility to see a bigger picture in a detailed way. And the next thing is the vulnerability and threat management. So in vulnerability and threat management, that team does certain dynamic testing, mainly like penetration testing. So the penetration testing is something they do it at runtime to see what features can be exploited, what weaknesses your system has. So they do all that testing with prior permissions from the application teams, and they do in testing environments primarily, and simulated production environments too. So they don't impact business by doing this in the production environments where the customers are doing. So they do this in a periodical way, in a planned approach, and see what threats can be arise and how it can be exploited. So they do that and notify the application teams accordingly. And they do assessments for their applications and what are the vulnerabilities it has. I have a separate slide for talking about vulnerability management. We'll dive more into that. And the next is the threat detection and response. So threat, it is usually called as a TDR team. So what these guys does is they keep on looking to your systems or application services and how an applications can be exploited and what threats can come. Say for example, in Ecuador or in Russia, you have a threat has been identified, a hack has been happened. It could be a ransomware attack or things like that. Can that particular attack happens in our systems? They do cross verify that. They don't wait until we get a brand new hack to our systems. They keep on looking to the outside systems and what hacks is already getting in place. Say, for example, recently we had colonial pipelines. All gas stations have got stopped. So, what makes them to exploit their weakness? What weaknesses they have? Do we have those weaknesses at our side? They are going to check that. So this particular team, they have a categorized bunch of teams. It could be a red team. So in red team, what happens is they do all these things in testing environments, this particular testing. So they check whether the attackers will try to undermine the security or attempt to gain access to systems in the test environment. So red teams basically always make sure, am I able to gain access to my system unauthorizedly? So that's what they used to continuously verify. Whereas the blue team, it's basically there are some acting defenders will be there. So these defenders will secure the systems from the attack. They keep monitoring the system during their exercise and conduct some active defensive techniques. So they are kind of defenders to protect your system to see what can be exploited. Whereas white team, they are the basically judges. They keep observing and watching to manage these exercises, and they document the lessons learned from these tests that's being done by red and blue teams. And there is a purple team as well. So they combines the knowledge from red and blue team during the lessons learned, and they do this after this exercise is being done. So they have this, different sets of teams is being there. The moment you get into a company within a cybersecurity field or information security field, you're going to see all these words and terminology in the teams. So try to get used to these terminologies so that way you don't feel new. So you in your subjects also, these practicalities may not be totally covered. So this is the reality where you need to know this terminology and what in each functional. There is nobody, if you get into an information technology field, you may be placed into an operation team or an engineering team or an architect team, VTM, TDR, IIM, things like that. You may not be kept outside and, hey, you're going to manage all of these things. That won't happen in reality. You would be absorbed into one specific team, and there you got to specialize yourself in doing that particular task. So, from that point of view, make sure in any company, if you go into security field, you will be absorbed into one of these teams, which are being boxed out here. And the next is IAM, so identity and access management. So, understand that every service or every system or every user, they have an identity. Identity means it's a subject. So a particular person has an identity. So that particular subject has certain access. So whether what systems he can use, what systems he is not allowed to use, what data he can access, what data he is not allowed to access. All that is being controlled from the access management side. And when I say authentication and authorization, proving that you are the identity that is being assigned to you, and you have the authorization to access this particular object. So a subject and object relationship will be managed in identity and access management. So that is being done at a scale, not at 1 or 100. It would be, say, for example, if a company has 100,000 employees or a contractors, everyone has an identity, and that identity has to be managed at a scale, and what systems he's allowed to access, what not, all that is taken care. That is also a separate team where they are specialized into that area, how to do all these things. So you have a lot of techniques, say like I have a separate page for this, we'll dive more into that. And next is BISO, Business Information Security Officer. The BISO is a team. What they do is they does the security for a business teams. So business could be, say, for example, in Fannie Mae we have single family, multi-family, capital markets, all these different business portfolio teams. So there will be a BISO for each of these portfolio. They look into the all functionalities of that particular portfolio, and they'll see what security aspects they can arise, or they can control, what security controls can be added. So, all from the business management point of view, they will look into that. So, for anything, they will be taking from business portfolios and then interact with other teams and get the things done. and they'll also provide solutions with secure by in consultation with security architects. So that's a separate team primarily deals with business portfolios in any company. And strategic enablement services. This is a separate team, mostly in federal or technology management companies they have. What they does is how a particular functionality can be automated, how a particular operations can be streamlined, and how a strategy can be enabled. So they are looking after a overall high level view of all the teams within the InfoSec. So they will be considering. They are also evaluating certain tools to automate certain operations, engineering aspects, things like that. So they have altogether a different aspect, strategic enablement services team. And we have integrated risk management. So most of the times in companies, business functionalities are such a way where you don't, the policy says something, the business cannot achieve that. So they eventually, when they don't do what policies or the standard says, and there is a risk associated to it. And what is that risk is the definition of a risk is threat times vulnerabilities. So a weakness can come in if you don't follow a policy defined by a security team. So then we got to assess what is the risk. The risk assessment needs to be done. And if that risk is being assessed, and what is the severity and what is the impact, what happens, what could be a damage it would happen if you don't follow this policy given by a security team. All these things analysis will be done by integrated risk management team. So these are all bunch of teams that is being there in most of the companies that has a security in practice. So I'll stop here to see if you have any questions. Okay. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. So what is the first one you said before firewalls? Oh, demilitarized zones. Okay. So demilitarized zone and firewalls say you have a network in a company. So when there is a request coming from a customer to your company, the first and foremost thing you have is demilitarized zone. People call it as ingress DMZ or egress DMZ. When the request comes from outside world to your network, then it is called ingress DMZ. And if you are sending a response or a request outside to the outside world, it is called egress DMZ. So the major functionalities of a DMZ is they do a packet inspection, what request it comes. They do, hey, bueno, yeah. Huh. Okay. I'm just thinking, let me see. Yeah, let's see. I'm just seeing what is more relevant to explain you better. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. So, do you have a DMZ here? No. Oh, yeah, okay. You have a DMZ here. So, do you see here? This may not be a right example common across, but the DMZs are there in most of the networks. So, what it does, is it better? Yeah. So, this is treat from here, from internet that's coming down to your network, and then it's coming down to your internal network. So when the internet comes in, you have a firewall here. So that firewall could be it could be stopping of certain requests which are not allowed, certain blacklisted IPs or certain allowed things. So they do all that stuff. Whereas in DMZ network, you have ingress DMZ or egress DMZ. So for incoming and outgoing requests to get inside. So they also will have a router and web server and mail server and any other additional servers. They may have IDPs also, identity providers. Uh, so this DMZ, it does a lot of functionalities. It breaks it breaks your TLS termin. It does your TLS termination. When I say TLS, it is the transport layer security. So where all the communications are using their digital certificates. So this DMZ has a certificates set at their side. They intercepts your request and decrypt your request with the certificates they already have and inspect the packets, and they also do authentication and authorization capabilities they have, and all of that stuff is being taken care and do the certain antivirus checks as well, and because your payloads has any virus involved in that, before it comes to your systems here, it does all of that here. So for ingress traffic. Whereas outgress traffic, it may not be the same set of functionalities. It can do something different altogether. So it depends upon the context of your traffic flow. Accordingly, the DMZ functionalities will vary. Whereas when it comes to the firewall, what IPs is being allowed and what IPs are not being allowed. Say, for example, in Amazon Web Services Cloud, you consider as access control list as a firewall, or security groups as a firewall. What it does is what ports can be allowed, what insecure ports can be blocked, and can have some implicit denies, things like that. So it's all access control side of the firewall. Whereas DMZ is more than a firewall. It does certain inspections and controls the network flows. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I'll move on to the next slide. So this is slide talks about whenever you go to a company, the first and foremost thing what you need to do is what the company policies or standards and guidelines and procedures they have. So you need to study their policies. And policies is a mandatory thing or a minimal set of things that defines the scope of that particular area. So it could be a data encryption policy, what algorithms you got to use. You can't go to a different set of algorithms of your choice. So you got to see the policy. So that's why the scope of policy is being a very minimal. So they just say at a high level statements, they don't be very detailed enough. So they just say, hey, this algorithm should be used, and this bits of encryption needs to be used. That's all. And you got to get into a standards and guidelines or procedures to get a detail out of it specific to that particular policy to know more details. So when it comes to a standard, it will tell that what policy is being said and how that particular requirement can be fulfilled in a bit elaborated way. So, for example, a standard can say a data classification. It could be a secret, top secret, or unclassified. If it is a top secret, what controls needs to be applied? If it is a regular secret, what controls needs to be applied? So it talks about certain compulsory requirements for a particular control that is already being defined in a policy. So the standards you need to know. So if you're getting into a security compliance analyst or any architect or any of the roles that we discussed before, you got to first read these things. You need to know what standards a company has and what guidelines, the recommended ways to implement a particular standard or a particular policy. It could be specific to that particular environment, so but you get an idea what it is looking for. And procedure could be a detailed step by step. So, what actions or what controls can be applied to be in compliance with a standard or a policy? So, make sure whenever you get into the role of any company or whenever you get into a internships or doing any project, keep in mind what policies, standards, guidelines, procedures are not only meant for security, it is meant for every field within an IT company. It could be there for other companies also, specifically in information technology. They have these things defined. So whenever you want to know, whenever you are doing something, make sure you get that particular standard or a policy and see what is the expectation. Anything beyond that could be become a violation that has certain consequence or adverse effects for you in your career. So make sure to be in compliance with these things. That's why I kept it as a separate slide for this, so that whenever you get into the company, especially into cybersecurity field, ask them what policies, standards, especially first two items. Ask for, so what are the standards and policies you have? Can you provide them access to those docs? And make a note of that and read them in your first few days whenever you get into a project in a company. And moving on, so I just want to give you an idea before cloud, what we have in terms of security. As I mentioned, we have a data security. So, data centers will be there, and they have certain sets of domains they have been handling before the cloud security model comes into the play. So, when I say cloud security, I'm not specifically talking about AWS or Azure or GCP. So, it could be any of these things. To get you an idea, I just took an example of AWS, but the first section we have around 8 domains are there. So a company, even today, they have, who are not into the cloud, they have a risk management. They are having how to protect your assets, and how they have a security engineering domain, and the network security, identity access management, and security assessment and testing, and operations, like how I show in the company, and the software development security. These are all different domains that gives a complete picture of information system security. You don't need to overwhelm with all that, but see, this is a full scope, a top-down approach. So at a bigger picture, this is what a whole information security, 8 domains, all that. And now, how these 8 domains from a on-premise information security systems transform it to a security in cloud. When it comes to security in cloud, definitely you should have a subject and identity relationships, which is being handled by identity and access management. And they too have certain controls. It could be detective, preventive controls. So those controls is being handled by different native services by each cloud platform. And you also have infrastructure protection. So there are a bunch of tools for infrastructure protection from AWS side and non-cloud side. So I just listed on what are different services at infrastructure security and how a data protection is being done. It could be KMS service, key management service, or hardware security modules, or meshes. These are all AWS native services. And incident response. When an incident response come, how you can do that with that is being common at on-premise or in cloud. But we have different ways to get that done, if not straightforward through a native service. And for any of these particular cloud, regular before cloud to after cloud security evaluation, the core pillars for protecting security is CIA triad. So confidentiality, integrity, availability. How you are protecting your data, services, your network communications is all coming under confidentiality. How you are making your stuff to be available for authorized users, and how you are making sure when the data comes from within the transits without any tampering of that data of your payload, or it could be a request response data, and all these things is called integrity. So someone should not come and tamper your integrity of data so that you don't receive incorrect information. So how do you achieve these things is being showcased here in the bottom diagram. So this is kind of a circular mode. Visibility, auditability, controllability, agility is all being achieved with corresponding cloud-based services. And these things is being achieved here, and these things will be achieved here. So just to give a glimpse of a full picture of how what domains you got to worry about when it comes to security at on-premise to cloud. Any questions here? Okay. So moving on to next slide. So here I'll be more getting into your identity and access management side of it. So here, authentication and authorization. The reason why I bought this particular slide here is to get you a feel of how an authentication and authorization, any security you need to worry about. First, you need to talk about first and foremost question is what is authentication and what is authorization. And your primary goal in a security domain is protect the data. If there is one thing you want to secure, first and foremost, then it's data. Data is an asset or a key for any security person to protect. And all remaining things are all combined to protect how to protect that data. And that has a classification, that has a states, and it has a roles. When I say states, the what state a particular data is in mode, things like that. So let's start from authentication and authorization. So when I say authentication, you have an identity. I call an identity as a subject. So a subject and object relationship, if you see, an object could be a file, an object could be a service, an object could be a program. So any of that sort. If an identity or a subject wants to access a particular object, you need to prove that this subject is a genuine subject or this identity is a genuine identity. So how do you do that? There are three ways at a minimum we have something you know. It could be a password, or it could be a one-time key code, or it could be an access token. So something you know that. So you can use that to prove that you are the identity. Only you knows that, not anyone else. And next of thing is something you are. It means your facial recognition. You use your iPhone or a Samsung to recognize your face, and it can recognize your thumb impressions. Some of the systems may do a iris scan, retina scan. So these are all something you are. So it means you are the only one which proves that you are that identity. No one else. The facial recognition and something you have means you may be having an additional token given only to you. It could be RSA token or it could be a VPN, Cisco provided VPN tokens. There will be an additional tokens. You always have an identity. You have an ID, but you got to prove that is you are. So something you know, something you are, something you have, are the different ways where you can prove your identity is called authentication. Now, all right, you already proved yourself as you are the identity, but what are all the things you have access? How do you authorize? So there are certain principles given for authorization. When you are providing an authorization technique, you should not give the access to your systems or data more than what you need. That is called least privilege principle. And you should not have one set of system with everything. You should have a separate sets of a partition systems with separation of duties. Like a service, it should not be a monolithic system where you can get access to a whole bunch of services within it. You should have a separate set of microservice and micro segmentation. You should have so that way access can be well controlled. So that's where separation of duties is an important principle for an authorization. And privilege creep. So what it means? Say for example, you're working in team one, you got five access, and you moved on to team two, you got another five systems access, and now you have 10 systems access. But you don't need first five systems access when you move to team two. You got to be relieved from first five systems. And if you don't do that, you get accumulated with so much of privileges getting access without, it's a violation of least privilege, and it eventually leads to privilege creep. So you getting a whole bunch of access to the multiple systems which you are not required to. And what it causes if you have a privilege creep, a particular hacker who got access to your identity can get into other systems and do the damage. And insider threats are nothing but a system who is when the person who is sitting next to you can take advantage of your identity and do all the damage to your systems. So that's why you should never give a privilege creep to a particular subject. What you need to do is when a person moving from team one to team two, you got to take out all the access what he has in terms of periodical audits or in terms of movement of team. When a person leaving a company, all that stuff, you got to revise all his controls, all his access, and then give only what he needs. Definitely, if he is leaving a company, he don't need anything. You need to clean it off before he steps out. So you need to just make sure when he's moving internally between the teams, you got to take out all his access and give only access he's required for that particular team. So that's a privilege free principle needs to be addressed. And access controls, you have a bunch. So what are all the mandatory access and what are all the discretionary access control? So to get one, to need something else, all that, and what database access controls. These are all policy enforcements you got to apply when you are granting an access to a particular service or an object. So default, make sure you deny everything based upon a request, analyze what he's going to do, and accordingly allow him to do that based upon sufficient approvals. So these are all different access controls they have. How these can be controlled? You have different mechanisms. We have a basic auth where user ID and passwords, subject and passwords. And if they are accessing, if a human user ID, you always need to have multi-factor authentication, including your emails or access to your systems. You always need to have a second level authentication, not just a single authentication. Either it could be a password. You need to have a second level authentication. That is called multi-factor. You may have a third factor also like facial recognitions, like something you are. And the OAuth, OIDC, SAML, these three are authorizations basically. So you have different ways where you don't want to use your ID and password throughout your cycles. You just use tokens. It could be an access token, it could be SAML assertions. So OIDC stands for Open ID Connect, Open Identity Connect, and SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. So when you are interacting with some heterogeneous network systems, or then you don't know. So you need to apply some federation. Acting on behalf of an identity can be achieved through a federative controls. So SAML can be used for that. So a SAML assertion can be done with your systems with the trust established in prior to it, and then get the token out of it and use that token to grant your services, to get access to your services. So these are all different controls. I just want to get you into familiar with this terminology. So now let's talk about data. So when we are talking about data, we have three different states. Like data when it is at rest. At rest means it could be in your hard disk or it could be in your database, things like that. So how you have to protect that if it is sensitive data using some encryptions and things like that. You need to protect data at rest. And data in transit, when one system to other system, it could be within the network or across the network, then the data has to be transited. So that is called data in transit state. And when you are using the data into your systems, then the data will come into main memory. And in the memory, you got to do certain processing of that data. It is not in rest, it is not in transit. It is in use, it is processing. That is called data in use. So these are the three different states of the data you got to protect when dealing with sensitive in nature. Say, for example, you have a social security number or you have a driver's license. So you got to protect that data in these three states using certificates, or it could be encryption mechanisms, tokenization mechanisms, things like that. So you need to make sure hackers should not take your data while in these three states. So that's about three different data states. And we also have the data roles. So in a business functionality, a person who owns the data, because say for example, you are a product owner of for a particular software or a particular product, and that product needs to work on certain business data. Then that particular team has a data owner whose responsibility to protect and whom to give access to that data is all being taken by care by the data owner. And the data owner cannot be taking care of all that data for whom they are getting accessed. They also need someone who needs to protect the data on his behalf of. So he's called steward. So the data steward is the one, say for example, a particular customer access my data or a particular client access my data. And that client said there should be a steward who needs to protect my data at their side on behalf of their data owner. And once that particular data is being reached to a particular service consumer side, then they need to manipulate the data. They need to process that data to get certain results, to get certain calculations, things like that. So the person who is doing that in an authorized way to process your data is called a custodian. So he is acting on behalf of a steward or a owner. So he is allowed to do certain manipulations, or he is allowed to do certain processing of that data to achieve certain results. So he is a data custodian bounded to the protection rules of the data owner. And the data users who will be using it for their analytic purpose, reporting purpose, and for display purpose, all that stuff, there will be data users. Wherever you go, when you're dealing with the data, these are the roles you should be aware of, and who will be using this data and how they are being getting controlled. And if at all some novice person coming and asking for your data, then you need to get the permissions from either steward or custodian or owner of that data. Then first question you should ask is, who is the data owner of this? Is he aware of that this data is being granted to this person or this particular role? These are the questions you need to know when you are dealing with the data. But on what basis you need to protect the data? You need to know the classification. You can't treat all the data in the same way. So you need to classify your data and label them as this data is top secret. For example, SSNs, they are top secrets. They are also called as cron jewels. So you got to label them as a top secret. Or driver's license, they are all PII information, personally identifiable informations, can be treated as top secrets. And certain secret information is there. Certain combination of data can conclude to a top secret, like email address, your address, physical address, all these things combined to identify you as a person, then can consider as a secrets. And confidential is something specific to your company that should not be disclosed to outside. And there are certain public data that doesn't require any classification. You can still tag it as an unclassified. So that doesn't require much of protection when compared with the other three. So these are different data classifications. So any data that comes in, initially it has, but a data will go through a life cycle. You need to create the data because depends upon the business functionality and depends upon the roles of data. You need to create the data and have a storage to preserve that data. And there are applications to use that data, and you got to share the data between the consumers and producers. And once there is no active usage of the data, then you got to archive for future use. And it has not been used for such a long time in archival state, then you can decide based upon the data owner's agreement, you can destroy it. So these are the different life cycle stages a data undergoes. So any questions here? So feel free to ask questions, though it is being small or big, doesn't matter. This is the time you can open up your doubts. All right. So moving on to next slide. So security engineering. So as you saw, a security engineering, there are a couple of engineering activities a team does. So if at all you want to do an encryption or a decryption on a particular data of sensitive in nature, what you need to have, you need to know a cipher. Cipher means an algorithm. It could be advanced encryption standard algorithm, AES, data encryption standard algorithm, triple dash. There are so many algorithms are there which are strong enough. RSA algorithms. There are so many algorithms out there. But if you want to encrypt a data, just an algorithm is not sufficient. You need to have a key. It could be a 128-bit key or 256-bit key, a random unique, universally unique identifier key, things like that. You need to have a key that uses this algorithm as a step-by-step process to encrypt your data and then store that in a encrypted form. That is called a ciphertext. Now, when say ciphertext is being given to a person and he is authorized to decrypt and take the clear text form of it, then he use the same key and apply the same cipher, and he can get the plain text of it. So this key, single key that is getting used for converting a plain text to ciphertext and ciphertext back to plain text is called a symmetric key. And if you have a asymmetric key that is being used here in PKI or in digital certificates or in digital signatures, they are called asymmetric keys. Asymmetric keys, you have public and private key, where you always encrypt with public keys and decrypt with private keys in public key infrastructure, whereas in digital signatures, it is the other way. So you encrypt with private key and decrypt with public key in digital signature verifications. I'll show you in the next slide of it how it works. And in combination of this encryption and decryption, we also use hash functions to achieve the integrity. Say, for example, you have a data and you have a hash function. It is an algorithm like SHA-256, secure hashing algorithm, things like that. Once you use this hash function on a data and you get a message digest out of it. So what is the purpose of it? So these particular hash functions are used for integrity purposes. So when you are having a particular data, say for example, this is a sentence, this is the data you have. In if you just remove a full stop at the end of that sentence, the message digest will get modified. Even a small change, it's still a message digest will get modified. So a ciphertext that we receive here that would be used to apply a hash function out of it and get a message digest. And I'll show you about how hash functions will be used in verifying whether the data is being tampered or not. That thing you'll see. Let's see first this PKI. So whenever you get a digital certificate, you use it for data in transits. So in the data in transits, the digital certificates will be used where you will be calling as one-way SSL and two-way SSL, things like that. So a subject is an identity. What he does is he sends a certificate signing request to a certificate authority. So this signing request would be signed by a private key because in asymmetric keys, as I told here, it always has a private key and a public key. A subject usually holds that. So he signs the request with his private key and sends to CA, and CA verifies the resource owner and certificate authority thinks he verifies whether he is the right one or not. And the subject's public key will be used by CA, and CA use a private key. And in combination of this digital signature, they provides a PKI certificate to him. And that certificate looks like this. So whenever you go to any site, if you open up the key, say for example, let me show you in HTTPS. If you see I'm in a Google Chrome, you see this guy. So this is a key where you can see a certificate, and that certificate is what I'm showing you there. And here you have there is a trust, and that trust is X509 basic policy has been there, and it has some details. And the details will be having what is the subject name, locality, common name, and there are so bunch of data will be there. So every certificate will have a unique serial number. And if that certificate has been hacked, then it goes into the serial number will be recorded into a list called certificate revocation list. That is called CRL. And whenever a certificate is being received to a service producer, they just verify that particular CRL that is maintained by CA and to see the serial number is there in that list or not. If it is there in that list, then it has been revoked. So they don't accept that certificate to produce a service. And what algorithm, signature, elliptic curve Diffie signature algorithm is being SHA-256. A secure hashing algorithm is being used. So you have all of these details. Take your time to go through all these details. So you have a whole lot of information here, what a certificate really has. So yeah, this is the CRL I've been telling you, the CRL DigiSet. You see, this is a HTTP. It means it is not secure enough. But to make it easy, what the CRL means, certificate revocation list, they make it as port 80 enabled for HTTP and make everybody to go and verify your certificate is being revoked or not. DigiSet is one of the CA, certificate authority. So DigiSet provides a CRL and that's been cross verified. So going back, so this is being given as PKI certificate that looks like this, and that is being given to a subject. And he uses this particular PKI certificate in order to liberally give this. This is a public certificate that, where you can have a public key within it, and that would be liberally granted to any other person to make sure he is a genuine certified service provider or not. So the consumers, when they get this PKI certificate from a producer, they cross-verify with CA to see whether this is being issued by you or not. So if they say, yes, I am the one who issued and it is not revoked, then that certificate is being used for further handshake in a secure mode or in a data in transit. So that's where this PKI certificates is being used. And now the digital signatures. Here, the asymmetric keys are slightly different. Whereas in PKI certificates, you encrypt with public key and decrypt with private keys. Whereas here, the hash function is being applied to get the message digest, and you apply a private key to encrypt as a digital signature, and that signature is being given to verify at the consumer side. So consumer already has a public key and he uses that particular algorithm and on top of this digital signature to get the message digest. Say for example, if anybody tampers this digital signature in between, the signature will change its message digest. And when he gets this message digest, it will not match with what they have. And there is a mismatch. So that is being considered as this particular signature is being forged or tampered by someone else, and they won't accept it. So this is a digital signatures concept here. Any questions here? All right. Next, the vulnerability management. So now, so far we saw the data aspect and the security or engineering, and now the vulnerability. So, like I shown in initially, vulnerability management, VTM, vulnerability and threat management, is one aspect that the security teams has to manage. Say, for example, you are developing a software. In order to develop a software, you need to have a language. It could be Java, Python, Ruby, Rails, whatever you want. So all that software, how it comes in the form of libraries. And that library writes a lot of code to provide you certain API functionalities. And you use those methods and classes in your code and get certain functionalities automatically. So that way you don't need to write everything from the scratch. And those vulnerable, those particular libraries can have certain weaknesses. So there is a body called OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project. It's an open source project. So they always release top 10 vulnerabilities within the code, within the softwares. And there is also another standard body called NVD, National Vulnerability Database. They always look for vulnerabilities within the software libraries that is being released in an open source world. And they keep on provides you what vulnerabilities is being raised. It can be on a daily basis, hourly basis. Very frequently, the vulnerability is getting raised. So when you are writing a code, you can use certain tools, which I'm going to show you in the secure DevOps, to scan for vulnerabilities when you're writing the code. So here, when there is a vulnerability is already been detected by National Vulnerability Database, then you would be finding out a particular score, like how I show CVSS. This is Common Vulnerability System Score. And this particular score will provide you a number, base score, that is 9.8. The number ranges from 0 to 10, and the critical is 9 to 10, which has a serious weakness. For a hacker, this is the key to get inside. So that is called a threat vector. So how a threat agent, who is a hacker, can attack your system by finding a weakness. And that weakness is this: common vulnerability enumeration. They decide in 2016, in this particular date, there is a weakness has been arised. And that weakness he'll use as a attack vector. Attack vector means a path. What path he can come inside to hack your system. So he uses this one. And how this particular 9.8 score is being calculated? They have a vector of attributes, that is impact score and exploitability score. There are two scores calculated based on these 8 attributes. And impact score is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, whereas exploitability score is the remaining 5, which is a scope, user interaction, privileges required, attack complexity, and attack vector. So these are the 8 attributes they use to calculate this one. So maybe I can show you, um, let me show you how this looks like. So you can, this is a calculator basically. So what it does is it has all these particular base score metrics, temporal score metrics, environmental score metrics. So we are talking about base score metrics. Say for example, you have this low and network attack vector is in a network, adjacent network, local, these things like that. And privileges required, there is no privileges you have. It means you don't have any access controls. And if there is any user interaction, you have any graphical user interface. And if you say make it as none. And what is the scope? If any change happens, is it going to impact things or not? So its scope is unchanged. And the impact metrics, the confidentiality, there is no authentication authorization. There is no digital signatures. And it's going to impact high. And you see, the overall score went up to 7.5. So it's been calculated automatically. And what equations it used, it tells all that math here. So you don't need to worry about all these things. Just use this calculator to see what base score matrix is been calculating to get you to that particular number. So if it is none, then these are all. And if you have any high, it means it can definitely be impacted. And this is high, and this is high, and you are 9.8. Because your base score matrix, the base impact and exploitability is been growing up high. The more the number, higher the risk, an attacker can exploit your weakness. So, so that take your time to go through this, and this is an attack vector. A person can come inside here. So what you need to do, you should have a periodical scans for your libraries that you've been using. It could be a Docker container or any Kubernetes pods or anything of that sort in a shared mode you are using. You are writing a custom code using certain libraries. You should have a periodical scans and apply your patches accordingly to that, so that your vector would not touch this particular number. So you should always be behind medium. It could be a low, or you should not have a none in an ideal state. But practically speaking, you should not be in critical mode. You should be medium and below. So then only your vulnerabilities can be managed. Otherwise, you never know. You can hack at any point of time. Any questions here? All right. So moving on to recent security attacks. The people doesn't follow these security controls, and they have these attacks happen. There are so many out there. Just to show you, I can show you how this particular gives you some graphical representation of how the attacks is been happening. So if you see it here in the 2021, a Facebook hack has been happen, Experian, and Microsoft hack. Um, the Facebook app is Aadhaar card. There are so many hacks has been happening in the Twitter hack, and the number it states how many records is being compromised. And if you get into that, you'd get some information news out of it. So just want to give a glimpse of how the hacks are happening at every point of time. So you'd be aware of what is the importance of a security person is getting into a company, what he needs to do, what is the importance of security controls to be followed. All these things will be aware. So let's take a few of them highlighted here. The recent Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. Ransomware is something they encrypt all your data and make it unusable, and they keep all those keys at their side, and they will ask you some money, a huge money, in millions of dollars they'll ask. And if you pay that, then they will give you they'll make you that particular key to decrypt it and bring back the operations into normal mode. And you might have observed that from Texas to New Jersey, there is around 5,500 miles gas pipeline was being there. It's been hacked, and they're asking for a ransom to be given. There are certain security companies they worked on, and the reason for this hack is the password got compromised. They don't have multi-factor authentication. Say, for example, if a password got compromised, something you have that doesn't have a two-factor authentication or a multi-factor authentication. So, and it's been hacked, and they gained access to your network, and they hacked all your systems. So it's always good to have any human user IDs, better to have a multi-factor authentication enabled to your systems. That's the reason there. Because there is no control for that. Now they have after this particular hack. But what is the loss? Operational and monetary loss, all that. And SolarWinds supply, it's a basically a network management system, a SolarWinds that is being used by IT companies, and they don't have enough access control list to restrict unauthorized users in a proper way, and that is being taken as a weakness, and the hackers got into that. So you need to have a zero trust networking in place so that you should not trust anybody. Only you need to trust if they have a proper authorization approved, then only you should allow only in a least privilege mode. And that access control is being leveraged, and the hackers got into the SolarWinds, and they entered into the network, and they silently take all the data, and they keep monitoring in there until they exploit your systems and break your systems in their functionalities. Until that, you don't be aware. So, and they got all this data out, and they've been using that data. And in the same way, the Equifax data breach. So there is a deserialization. The serialization is nothing but marshalling and unmarshalling, they used to say. Converting a data stream to an object and object back to data stream is called serialization and deserialization. So during who has to do that serialization? What APIs or what methods you use? What libraries you use to do that? If you are allowing deserialization by anybody, by a remote code execution mode, a hacker can come and deserialize your data and read all your data. When a particular extreme library is being identified as a vulnerability, like I shown here, it is being shown here as a 9.8. You need to have some compensatory controls or safeguards surround that, and apply a patch or do certain safeguard controls to protect this particular library so that a hacker cannot come and do your deserialization of your payloads. So they didn't take care of that part. So that's caused a data breach of millions of their records. So all the credit reports that's been provided by Equifax, who has that particular SSNs and their email addresses, data has all been got breached just because ignoring a small vulnerability in a library. And the Capital One data breach server side. So we usually say that make sure. I think this has been duplicated. I just explained here what it is. So one of their Amazon employees has been a former employees has been working there, and they kept their secrets into the version control system in the GitHub. So and that is being not secret scanned in their pipelines, in DevSecOps pipelines. And today, one of the important control is never put your secrets into version control. They should be kept into a vault, and only authorized users should gain access to that vault. So these are the controls you need to place. If they don't place, they hacked all of their the secrets. In cloud, the secrets are secret access key and access key code. So these secrets is being used to gain access to your networks. So they hacked all of these keys, which are kept in their version control system. No matter it is a lower environment or a higher environment, it could be a development environment or a production environment. You should not keep any secret within the code and version control them. You should always keep secrets into the vaults, secret vaults. It could be CyberArk. We have a bunch of tools out there. Secrets Manager from AWS and CyberArk. There are so many vaults out there. Even HashiCorp now provides a secret vault from their side. So these are all certain controls is not being in place caused these security attacks. Any questions here? All right. Now, this artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how this can be leveraged in cybersecurity? So here in cybersecurity, there is the main source of security operations, what we use is logs. So we capture these logs and see any abnormal behaviors. And if you see, there are a couple of behaviors which are in abnormal, call it as anomaly. So I listed down a couple of things here. Say, for example, I'm an authorized user supposed to do a certain functionalities. And if I try to do a functionality that is not allowed by me, and if it always says, hey, you are not allowed, you are not allowed, and if it frequently says that, that is being captured in my logs. And my my machine learning algorithms has to detect them because my machine learning algorithms always captures this information through the logs, which is defined in input sources section, and it reads that information and notify corresponding person who is responsible for that system. So authorized user doing unauthorized activity is supposed to be detected as an anomaly, number one. And transactions performed by a source IP. Say, for example, I use my Bank of America account to do certain funds transfers and all that in morning 9 to evening 5. In during this time, I do my operations. If someone, if my logs captured information doing the same activity in the midnight at around 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., things like that. This is not a frequent operation which I used to do, and that is a abnormal activity my system has to be captured. So it can get this kind of information from this logs and notify me about there is a anomaly detected where a transaction is performed by a source IP not being used for past 3 weeks. And this is not the IP I usually does. That's an indication that someone else in a hacker role is doing this activity. So when I notified that, I can take a corrective action on that, or I can do a preventive action in stopping that transaction further exploiting more. And a transactions doing in non-businesses, like I just told, if it is doing in off hours or in holidays or in a weekends, which is not supposed, I usually won't do, or any company that doesn't do any transactions in holidays. And say, for example, if you are doing a lender activity or if you are requesting any company activity, that usually does in working days. It won't happen in weekends or holidays or non-business hours. So those kind of things has to be tracked. And we also see a transaction happening in a different IPs. If a person who is sitting in some other region, some other country, and if he is making a transaction, if I want to send money from my from USA to some other country, and if that's a regular operation I've been doing, and some other person is trying to do the same transfer, then that's an abnormality. So how do I capture all this anomaly detection is we have a bunch of tools to do that. So one of it is the SIEM, CLAM, and SOAR. These are all a couple of things we have. SIEM is nothing but security information and event management. So this is a conceptual path where the information and event management that happens in your applications will be captured by SIEM. And that would be done by so popular tools today. We have Splunk, and there are so many other tools out there where they can aggregate your log information and make this anomaly detection available using AI and ML techniques and notify the teams accordingly to take corrective actions. And it also has certain preventive actions can be enabled. And there are other tools like Gurukul. So many other tools are there from the SIEM point of view. And CLAM is nothing but common logging and monitoring. So whatever the logs that is been coming, and it can enable a monitoring point of it. So if there is any anomaly detection is happening, it monitors your logs and make sure you have this particular anomaly being detected, and that particular anomaly will be notified in authorized personnels. So that can be done. And there is a SOAR called Security Orchestration and Automation and Response that I already told you in the security operations team. So they does this particular automation and response using the tools that is available in today. They use them if for any anomaly detection, any abnormal behavior that they found in this particular scene logs, and that would be notified as a as an anomaly detection to corresponding team members. So this is where AI/ML is definitely helpful in cybersecurity space, so that these are all can be considered as a preventive measures. So preventive controls that you can provide so that the damages can be minimized or exploitation of weaknesses can be minimized. This is just a drop in the ocean of scenario that I have mentioned here in AI and ML world. It has so many other things where you can leverage. You can make it as a spam mails, or you can make it as how hackers are coming in. There are so many scenarios you can leverage that field. Anomaly detection is only one of it. Okay, so now this is a secure DevOps. So somebody call it as DevSecOps. So whenever you are writing a software, you got to build that software. I mean, before building, you got to do a commit the code to a version control. It could be GitHub or GitLabs, and then from there build the packages and do certain testing. It could be unit testing, automated unit testing, and things like that, and move it to development environment or integration, acceptance, and all that. Do certain testing at runtime. So, and finally, do certain compliance check and do certain governance things, and then push it to deployment. So here when you are moving into starting from checking in the code and pushing into production, you got to do lot of quality gates and you got to do lot of security checks. So that's why it is called securing your development operations. Starting from once you are done with your development, because you cannot write the code on plain vanilla mode like without any help of any libraries. You got to use a bunch of libraries, you got to use a bunch of softwares, languages, and servers you got to use to support your software code. And these particular areas of the code always comes with vulnerabilities, and you got to make sure they are detected in advance. And it could be in static in nature, and it could be in dynamic in nature. You got to protect them well in advance. They are called preventive controls. So that's where securing your development operations, you got to have a proper pipeline in place. So today we have CI/CD tools like Jenkins, and the Terraform, I mean, the GitLabs is coming up with integrated CI/CD pipelines. The moment you commit the code within the GitLabs itself, you have a CI/CD pipelines. It can build it for you and do all the security checks. So continuous integration is the first section of it, and continuous deployment is the second part of it that is shown in the bottom of the screen this time. So when you start, you do a threat modeling. What is threat modeling? So you'll be using a threat modeling tools here. Like today we have SD elements, a threat modeling tool. So that threat modeling, what it does is it takes certain artifacts of your solution model and does whether you're up. It doesn't read any of your code. It just takes what business model you have, what solution model you have in terms of a artifacts or in a diagram, in a predefined diagram, and thus any possible threats it can come within your design solution, and that would be first highlighted here at a design level. And once that is being done, it has been through, you are good here in threat modeling point of view. And SCM is configuration management, software configuration management like GitHub and all. It will check out your code and do the build. So during the build time, you do the security quality and all. So the quality is basically it triggers the static analysis of your code. So that means during the build time, you can make sure a secret scanner. For example, any of your code has any secrets, kept it in text files so that hackers can go and take those secrets and exploit yourself. Or insider threat is the biggest problem today. So they do all these checks at the build time itself. And then SAST is a static application security testing where it uses certain tools called HP45, Sonatype, things like that. What it does is the quality of your code, or is there any best practices is not being used while writing the code. If your code is vulnerable for any weaknesses, so they verify all of that in the SaaS thing. These are all APIs. You can plug in these APIs into your pipeline. Consider each of these section is a task in your pipeline, or it can be a job in your pipeline. So it's a CI/CD pipeline starting from beginning to end. Each of these will be a job or a task. So the SAST verifies your source code, and there are certain other tools are there to, for example, Nexus IQ. Nexus is a source code repository where third-party libraries will be scanned. So all that is being part of SAST. And software composition analysis. What this does is, this is also a separate tool. What it does is the dependency checks, whether you are using dependencies only, or you are using more than what you need from dependency libraries. So for example, if a version 5.0 is required, you don't need version 4.0 library in place. 5.0 should be enough. So that kind of checks will be verified in a software composition analysis. Once this part is been over, you do a automated unit testing. So you write unit test cases to make sure all of your code is software tested, unit tested or not. So that gives a coverage. How much of your code is being unit tested, how much of your code is not being unit tested covered. So that report, you have a tool style sonar, things like that. So where automated unit testing will be done. Once the static verifications are all being done, now you are good enough to go for a deployment. So these are all integration side of it, continuous integration, CI portion. Now, in the integration testing, it means basically you use tools like JMeter, where you can see whether a collaboratively, if you make an API call, a service call, um, all systems are integrated together to give you a unique result. So that integration testing would be combined here. I would take my word back that the integration testing, I mean, whatever I use the JMeter, that will be done here at the dynamic testing. Integration testing is combining all of the software versions is being collected here, and those test will, I mean, those software packages will be taken here and package it together. And they do here, say, for example, in today we have images, Docker images. So you might be knowing about the images that is been instantialized to get a container which has all the softwares being packed together. And you got to do a static scan for your container as is. If that particular image is being any vulnerabilities can cause. And once that image is being generated here, then you got to deploy to a staging environment. Staging environment is one thing where you can apply a policy enforcement, like any specific services is being granted or not. Say, for example, in a cloud, if you want to deploy, there are certain services you are allowed. Cloud usually has hundreds of native services support. You are not allowed to use all of those services because the company doesn't verify all of those services. So your deployment should not make sure that particular services, unauthorized services, is being used in your deployment. So that enforcement will be verified here. Only authorized services is being used within your package, or any unauthorized services are being used here. Say, for example, in AWS, you have Kinesis. So that Kinesis is being approved and it can be used. And for example, you didn't allow a multi-region key. Recently, they have released a feature. And if you use that one, that would be flagged here. So these kind of enforcements will be verified here. And the functionalities will be verified in user acceptance testing. And if there is anything goes wrong, then they will cross verify or fix things like that. And if everything is fine, then they go for the dynamic application security testing, DAST. So remember that all these terminologies, whatever I've been showing out here, these are all practically used in every company today. You name it as Google, you name it as Microsoft, you name it as Amazon. Every company has this SAST, SCA, DAST, and all of these things are already there. This is not something new. These are all existing in corporate world today. To be a healthy life cycle supposed to be looks like this in a CI/CD world. So this DAST is dynamic application testing. It can include penetration testing, like I told. So it can be using your integration of services and see if there is any load testing you want to do. You can use JMeter to make an API calls in a rate limiting mode. Say, for example, an API has a throttling set. Like throttling, I mean, if you have only 10 API calls to be allowed within a second, 1 second is 1000 milliseconds. So only 10 API calls is being allowed. And you can arrange your JMeter to send 20 API calls within a second and see that is being handled properly here or not. It has to fail. That is an expectation out of it. So that is being verified in the DAST, things like that. And infrastructure vulnerability scanning. Once your deployment is being done, your infrastructure is already being ready. So we have tools like Nessus from Tenable. So what it does is, when in the cloud, most of the deployments are there today, it goes and verifies what instances you've been using, what databases you have been using, and what operating systems and what file systems. All of this infrastructure, they will be verifying with Nessus. And especially these things are pretty much useful when you have dedicated infrastructure. Or some cloud environments doesn't allow you to do that vulnerability scanning. on their infrastructure because they are going to take care. But in an on-premise, if you have your own infrastructure, then infrastructure scanning will be done because a vulnerability can come at any stage, not only all the time at software level. It can come at hardware level also. So they use tools called Tenable company has a tool called Nessus. So they use that one. And there is a compliance level scanning. So the compliance is you have today a lot of compliance systems are there, like NIST, that stands for National Information System Technology Standards, and FedRAMP, FISMA. There are so many HIPAA, so certain compliance are there. So all this compliance today, it is being provided by the cloud service providers. So those will be verified here. The compliance are is our say for example PCI DSS payment card industry data security standard. So that is a compliance certification a company has. Whenever they are releasing the code, they got to make sure that particular standard is in compliance or not. So that would be verified at this stage. It got to be at runtime. And finally, the compliance has been cleared, and the governance team for that particular project, they have to come and cross-verify all of these stages and finally say, go ahead approval. Once if they say go or no go, accordingly, the production deployment will be allowed. So once it is being deployed, then you are good with a development operation for that particular release. This is a typical release management cycle. Any company that goes, ideal pipeline is what looks like this. But most of the companies, they not necessarily follow all of these things, all of these particular jobs in place. But that's where, but this is an ideal approach to be followed. You got to have a secret scan, and you got to have static testing, dynamic testing, compliance verification, infrastructure verification, all these things you got to do for every production release that you do. So this is an ideal secure DevOps model. You can call it as DevSecOps pipeline also. So if somebody asks you what is your DevOps model, then you can always say these are the things you do. You recommend your ID in an ideal mode. Any questions here? The DevOps is it's a kind of operational model. So when you write a software, when you want to deploy it into a production or into any environment that is accessible to a customer or a user, then you need to go into certain operations. What are those operations? You have to commit your code to a version control system, and from there, it has to take the code and build a package and package it and deploy it into a production. Simple four steps, but there are no quality gates like SAST, SEA, unit testing, or DAST. These gates are not there. Without these quality gates, if you just has checkout, build, and unit test, package, and then deploy, then it's called plain vanilla DevOps development operations. You write the code, commit your code, and deploy it into systems. It's a regular development operation. And if you apply certain security gates in between, like if there are any vulnerabilities, if there are any improper coding practices in place, or your infrastructure has any vulnerabilities, all these verifications, if you make, then it is called securing your DevOps. That, yeah, sure. Any other questions? So, all right, that's all I have for today. So, and I can leave a couple of minutes for you to, if you have any other questions, not necessarily in the slides, what I had told. If you have any general questions of any doubts related to your career or to project, any other guidance, feel free to ask me. Yeah, yeah, sure. I just prepared the slides this morning, so I didn't get chance to send you in advance. I'll send it to you after the call. Oh, okay. Let me open my laptop.